When a journalist tries to trick RFK Jr. with tough questions about his dad and his past on live TV, he thinks he's got the upper hand. But then everything turns around in a way nobody expected. Before we jump into it, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Also, hit that subscribe button. The more subscribers we get, the cooler stories I can share. The studio lights were super bright that night on one of America's biggest talk shows. Everyone in the room could feel the excitement as RFK Jr., the brand new United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, walked onto the set. He'd just taken his oath of office, and Robert stood tall with the calm confidence of someone who wasn't scared to show who he really was. But Morgan Drew, the host, had a different plan. Drew was famous for his tricky questions and leaning hard into one side of politics. He'd been getting ready for this for weeks. His producer had promised they'd keep things nice and talk about the new government team, but the sneaky look in Drew's eyes said something else. As Robert sat down, the quick hellos before the interview felt rushed and fake. Drew's smile didn't look real, and the crew seemed extra nervous. Something wasn't right, and Robert, with his years as an environmental lawyer, could tell a trap was coming. All that lawyer training had taught him how to figure out a room like this. And right now, every gut feeling was screaming that Drew's questions were full of sneaky surprises. The first question came with a fake smile. Robert saw Drew holding his note cards super tight. "Mr. Secretary of Health and Human Services," Drew started, his voice sounding way too sweet. "Let's talk about your wild ride from criticizing Trump and COVID stuff to becoming his health secretary." Robert smiled back, his eyes showing he'd learned a lot from life. "You know, Morgan, that's a great place to start. It's about more than just politics. It's about how Americans can grow and get each other." The audience leaned in a little. This wasn't the answer Drew thought he'd get. Robert didn't sound mad or defensive. Drew wiggled in his seat, his next question suddenly not feeling so strong. "Grow and get each other?" Drew said, his voice sounding a little mean. "Is that what we're calling it?" Some people might say it's just about what's easy for politics. "You see, Morgan," Robert answered. His voice was calm and easy to hear. "In America, we have this awesome thing where we can change our minds when we learn new stuff. A few years ago, I didn't like the president. I was only seeing things one way. But then I noticed something cool. I saw how his ideas were really helping American taxpayers and making America super great again." Drew's face got a tiny bit serious. "Let me ask you something, Morgan," Robert went on. He looked right at him, but not in a mean way. "Have you ever changed your mind about something big? Have you ever seen proof and figured out you might have been wrong at first?" Drew waited a little too long to answer. "We're here to talk about your changes, Mr. Secretary of Health and Human Resources, not mine." He messed with his note cards, obviously wanting to switch to his next big question. "Speaking of changes, let's talk about your speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. You mentioned God helping with government choices. Don't you think mixing church and state like that is risky?" The crowd got quiet and nervous. Drew had just brought up a touchy topic, and the sparkle in Robert's eyes showed he was ready for this exact question. "God's help, Morgan?" Robert leaned in a little, his voice sounded strong and sure. "What I really said was that the guys who started our country knew morals and leadership mattered. They weren't scared of believing in something. They were scared of a bossy government." A few people in the crowd said, "Amen." Drew's face got tight. "But in today's world with all kinds of people," Drew began. But Robert held up his hand a bit. "Let me finish this because it's a big deal," Robert said. He sounded nice but serious. "When I started this job, I put my hand on the Bible and promised to do my best. Leaders in our country have done that forever. Not because we're making one religion the boss, but because we know our rights come from God, not the government." Drew looked over at his producer, who was watching closely from the side. "You know what's cool, Morgan?" Robert went on, his voice sounding a little like he was thinking about his own life. "Back when I helped out with laws and nature stuff, no one cared that our chaplain was there. No one got mad when we prayed before big jobs. Because when things got real, even the doubters knew there was something bigger than just politics." Drew's cheeks turned a bit red. "Okay, let's switch to how you feel about President Trump. You said he's like God's tool to fix America. Don't you think that's a little wild? What I think is wild, Robert answered, still super calm, is how some big news people worry more about a leader who prays than about rules that make life harder for families. He stopped for a second to let that sink in. But since you mentioned President Trump, let's talk about what's really going on instead of just words. Let's talk about what's happening in our towns since he started. The room got super quiet. Even Drew, who usually jumps in fast, seemed to chill out for a moment because of how steady Robert was. Drew started to look a little shaky. Let's talk about you, Mr. Secretary of Health and Human Resources. You've written a bunch of books about nature, health, shots, your life, and growing up simple. But now you're in a big power spot. Some people might say you forgot where you started. That's a cool thought, Morgan, Robert said, still chill. Because where I'm from, we look at who a person really is, not how fancy they seem to Washington big shots. Drew laughed a little meanly. Is that what you call this big switch on Trump? You used to write some pretty strong stuff against him. Yeah, I did, Robert said. And you know what's tougher? Saying you were wrong and sticking up for what you think is right, even when people like you try to mix it up. The crowd made some agreeing noises. Drew pulled at his shirt collar. Mr. Secretary, Drew said, sounding a little snotty, you've made a name as a guy who speaks for regular workers. But here you are in a fancy suit, standing up for a super rich guy. Don't you see how that looks funny? The room felt colder all of a sudden. A few people in the audience wiggled in their seats, but Robert didn't budge. If anything, he smiled just a tiny bit. You know what I see, Morgan? I see someone who thinks a nice suit can change what a guy believes in. Let me tell you something. These values... Robert touched his heart. The ones my grandma taught me in New York. They don't change if you move to a new place or get a fancy job. Drew's eyes got small. So you're saying your big change has nothing to do with wanting power in politics? I'm saying, Morgan, that unlike some people on TV, I don't care about making everyone happy. I care about sticking to the stuff I grew up believing. Drew wiggled in his seat, looking uneasy. So you're saying we should forget all the mean stuff you said before and just believe you're Trump's new... He stopped for a second to make it dramatic. Puppet? That word floated out there like a challenge thrown down. A few people in the crowd gasped, but Robert answered super calm, like a chess pro making a smart move. You know, Morgan, calling me a puppet says more about you than me. Robert's voice stayed chill, but you could hear some toughness in it. In your world, maybe it's silly to stick by someone you look up to, but let me tell you what I learned as a Marine. He leaned in a little. When you're fighting, you figure out who a person really is by what they do, not what the news says. I've seen President Trump up close, not the fake version you and your buddies made up. The crowd started clapping loud. Drew tried to cut in, but Robert kept going. You say puppet. I say it's about knowing real leadership when I see it. And yeah, I'm proud to work with President Trump. But come on, Drew said, his voice all snarky. A smart guy like you has to see it's weird to back someone you used to trash. There you go again, Morgan, Robert said, still calm. You're so busy looking for stuff that doesn't match up, you're missing what's right in front of you. The real weird thing would be pretending I didn't see what I saw just to make people like you happy. The clapping got crazy loud. Drew looked at his producer, who was waving like wild from the side, but Robert wasn't done. And since you mentioned how smart I am, he said with a little smile, how about we talk about the sneaky stuff I've seen and how you report on this administration? My reporting? Drew's voice got louder. We're not here to... Oh, but we are! Robert jumped in smooth as butter. Because just last week you did a whole bit doubting my faith, saying it was, what you call it? Oh yeah, convenient election season Christianity. Drew's face turned red. I was just talking about the timing, he said. Timing of what? Robert leaned in. The fact that I've gone to the same church since before I got into politics? Or maybe you want to question my grandma's faith too? She's the one who taught me to pray before every meal, even when we barely had any food. A lady in the front row nodded hard. That's not what I meant, Drew said, but he didn't sound sure. Let me make this clear, Morgan, Robert went on, his voice strong and proud. You can ask about my politics. You can disagree with my choices. But when you hint that my faith is just a trick for votes, you're not just coming at me. You're coming at every American who cares about their faith deep down. Drew looked at his notes, trying to find something easier to talk about. Let's talk about what you said lately, he said. Yeah, let's talk about that, Robert agreed. Like when you said last month that anyone who likes old school values is, and I'm quoting you, stuck in the past. Tell me, Morgan, do you think the millions of Americans going to church every Sunday who love family stuff in their country, are they all just stuck in the past? The studio got super quiet. Drew's cool guy act was falling apart every second. He messed with his papers and said, Mr. Secretary of Health and Human Resources, you're flipping this interview on me. No, Morgan, Robert answered. I'm just trying to have a real talk about how you and your buddies look down on regular people. Robert's voice stayed calm. You asked me here thinking you could embarrass me for my beliefs, my life, and for backing the president. But let's talk about what really bugs you. The studio went still, everyone listening hard. It bugs you that someone from my hometown doesn't think like you. It bugs you that I went to Yale Law School but still believe in old school values. Most of all, it bugs you that I can see what you're trying to do. Drew tried to take charge again. Your accusations are... Robert's face got serious for the first time. They're not accusations, Morgan. They're just things I noticed. Like how you rolled your eyes when I talked about prayer earlier, or how you made fun of my hometown last week on your show, calling it Trump country. That hit Drew like a loud boom. The crowd sat super quiet, totally shocked. Look, this isn't about politics, Robert said, keeping his voice strong but chill. It's about respect. Respect for people's beliefs, respect for old school values, respect for tons of Americans who don't need your okay to love their country or back their president. Drew's face went pale like he'd seen a ghost. He peeked at his producer again, who was now staring at them, half worried, half hooked on the drama. The interview had totally gone off their sneaky plan. Maybe we should switch topics, Drew mumbled, checking his watch. Already looking at the time, huh? Robert said with a little grin. I've noticed you keep doing that ever since we started talking about faith and values. Not your favorite stuff to chat about, huh, Morgan? The crowd giggled. Drew looked super awkward now, no hiding it. For a guy who acts like he's all about tough journalism, Robert went on, you sure seem quick to dodge when things don't go how you want. Drew tried one last jab. Isn't this the same trick you pulled when you went from trashing Trump to cheering for him? There you go again, Robert answered, totally calm. You love bringing that up, don't you? Let me ask you something, Morgan. Have you ever changed your mind about someone after actually meeting them? After seeing who they really are instead of just believing what the news says? An older lady in the crowd shouted, Tell him, Mr. Secretary of Health and Human Resources. You know what's really going on here, Morgan? Robert asked, his voice full of belief. It's not about what I said before or what I do now. It's about something that freaks you and your buddies out. The idea that someone can think for themselves, change their mind because of real-life stuff they've seen, and stick to what they believe, even when the media won't quit attacking them. Drew was sweating big time now. Mr. Secretary, you're twisting what I said. Nope, Morgan. Robert cut in, still cool as ever. I'm just showing you a mirror, and I don't think you like the reflection. A reporter who came here wanting to make me look dumb, but ended up showing everyone his own biases. He turned a bit to talk straight to the crowd. See, what Morgan doesn't get is that real honesty isn't about never changing your mind. It's about being brave enough to say you were wrong, even when guys like him are ready to jump all over you for it. The crowd went wild, clapping louder than ever. Even some of the crew guys were nodding along. When I first met President Trump, I had to make a choice. Robert kept talking, his voice calm but strong. I could either stick to what I already thought about him, or I could look at what he does and how much he really cares about our country. I picked truth instead of being stubborn. Maybe your network should try that sometime. Drew looked super worried at his producer, who was now sliding a hand across his throat. That's the sign to hurry up and finish. And you know what, Morgan? The American people are fed up. They're sick of being judged for believing in God. They're tired of people making fun of what they think is right. And most of all, they're done with reporters who act like their job is to boss people around instead of just telling the truth. The whole crowd in the studio was standing up now. Drew tried to talk, but the loud clapping drowned him out. His big plan to trick Robert totally flopped. Drew coughed and looked defeated. "Well, I think we're almost out of time," he said. "Yeah, we are," Robert nodded, getting up from his chair. "But before I leave, I want to say one more thing to all the Americans watching at home." He turned right to the camera, looking honest and determined. "What you saw today isn't just about one interview or one reporter trying to make me look bad. It's about something way bigger. It's about sticking to what you believe." The studio got super quiet, everyone listening hard. You see, they thought they could embarrass me for my faith. They thought they could laugh at me for liking President Trump. They thought they'd make me say sorry for believing in old school values. But here's what they don't get. These aren't just opinions about politics. These are the ideas that made America, the things that kept us going when life got tough, and the truths that will show us the way ahead. Robert fixed his tie and stood up straight. To every American who's been picked on for their faith, who's been teased for what they value, who's been told they're wrong by history, stand tall. Because in the end, being a good person isn't about making critics happy. It's about staying true to what's in your heart. As Robert walked off the set, the audience jumped up, clapping so loud it felt like the room was shaking. Drew just sat there, shocked, his sneaky plan completely ruined by Robert's strong and calm way of standing up for himself. And that shows one thing. Sometimes the best way to handle rude people is to stay classy, and the strongest way to fight lies is with truth. If you like this story about sticking to your beliefs, hit the like button and subscribe.